I remember the moment everything began to tilt, though back then it felt less like a beginning and more like a collapse. It was a Thursday, the kind of cloudy, ordinary day that shouldn't carry any significance at all. But the smallest days often become the loudest memories. I was standing in the hallway at school, holding a stack of books too close to my chest, and I didn't know yet that my life had already started crumbling from the inside, long before anyone found out. It wasn't that I was doing anything wrong. I was just me, quiet, observant, someone who lived inside their head more than in the world around them. I had always walked a little too softly, spoken a little too carefully, moved with a kind of gentleness no one else my age seemed to understand. And people notice gentleness. They notice anything that doesn't match their idea of how a boy should carry himself. But confusion doesn't start with other people. It starts with you. It started with the mirror. There was a mirror in the upstairs bathroom at home. Old, slightly warped, framed by a wooden border that had once been painted white but had long since faded into a tired ivory. I used to avoid it. I'd brush my teeth without lifting my eyes, splash water on my face with the lights half off, slip out of the doorway before my reflection could settle. Because the mirror didn't show me. It showed something mismatched, blurred at the edges, like an unfinished sketch someone abandoned halfway. I didn't have the language yet. I didn't have the courage to even notice the way I tilted my head, or why my stomach fluttered when I saw soft fabrics, or why part of me felt relieved when someone mistook me for a girl on the phone. Back then, I thought being torn in two was normal, that most people lived with an invisible seam running down the center of their lives. But confusion becomes heavy. It becomes something that presses into your ribs until you have trouble breathing normally. And I carried that weight everywhere. At school, it was worse. The hallways were always too bright, the voices too sharp, the expectations too obvious. The other boys moved in packs, loud and unafraid. They walked with shoulders that announced themselves, voices that claimed their space. I watched them with something like envy and something like dread, because no matter how hard I tried to mimic their confidence, the movement never felt natural. It felt like wearing someone else's skin. That was the real problem. I had never learned how to wear my own. The day things finally came to a head wasn't dramatic. Not at first. I was just opening my locker when I heard it, a whisper that wasn't even meant to be hurtful. That almost made it worse. "Hey, isn't that him? The the Sissy." The word slipped through the air like a quiet little arrow, not sharp enough to kill, but sharp enough to lodge itself inside me. I froze. My hand tightened around the metal door. And I remember thinking, absurdly, how did they know? As if I had a secret written across my face. As if they'd seen the clothes I kept hidden under my bed. The scarf I draped around my shoulders when the house was empty. The way I practiced softer smiles when no one was watching. But they didn't know those things. They didn't need to. Because sometimes people see the things you spend your whole life trying not to see. I didn't turn around. I closed my locker carefully, as though any sudden movement might shatter me, and walked away. My legs felt strange, like I was walking underwater. Every sound blurred. My heartbeat was too loud. Sissy. The word echoed in my head like a name I had never asked for, and yet somehow recognized. That was the worst part, not that they said it, but that some small part of me agreed. Or feared it. Or resonated with it. Confusion is a fog, and that day it swallowed me whole. When I got home, I didn't go to my room. I went straight to the bathroom, to that old warped mirror I always avoided. For some reason, I needed to look at myself, needed proof that I was still the same person, even if I didn't understand who that person was. The reflection looked back at me with wide eyes. Not angry, not broken, just lost. I leaned closer. It felt like leaning into another world. "What are you?" I whispered, even though I already feared the answer. The reflection's lips parted a fraction of a second before I consciously moved. It felt alive, separate, almost tender. My reflection wasn't mocking me or judging me. It wasn't calling me names. It was simply waiting, patiently, the way a quiet friend waits for you to open up. And for the first time, I wondered if the reflection might know something I didn't. If it held answers I was too afraid to seek. This was how confusion grows roots, not with a single question, but with the slow realization that you've been asking the wrong questions your whole life. I didn't cry. I didn't break. I simply stared at myself and felt something deep inside begin to shift, like a door unlocking in a dark hallway. I didn't know yet that this was the beginning of discovery, of conflict, of transformation, of harmony. All I knew was that something in the reflection had softened toward me, and I wasn't sure whether that terrified me or comforted me. If confusion feels like fog, then discovery begins like a thin beam of light cutting through it, faint, hesitant, almost afraid of its own brightness. That beam doesn't arrive with certainty, it arrives with questions, with moments so subtle they can only be recognized later, when looking back. For me, discovery began with the smallest gesture. I stopped looking away from the mirror. Not all at once and not proudly. At first, I lingered a second longer each morning, catching my own eyes before quickly turning away. Then a few seconds more the next day. A week later, I found myself studying the angle of my face, the softness of my expression, the way my cheekbones looked a little sharper when I tilted my head. It wasn't vanity. It was curiosity, the fragile, trembling kind that feels like touching something forbidden. My reflection started feeling less like a stranger, and more like someone trying to communicate with me silently. Someone patient. Someone who understood what it meant to be trapped between what you show the world and what you hide from yourself. Everything changed the afternoon I came home early. The house was empty, quiet enough to hear the hum of the refrigerator from down the hall. I dropped my backpack onto the floor of my room and sat on the bed, staring at the dresser. I knew what was inside. I knew because I had hidden it myself. It wasn't much. Just a neatly folded pile of soft clothing I had collected over months in ways that even I didn't fully understand. A thin lavender scarf, a pale pink hair clip, a silky undershirt that felt cool and soothing against the skin. Things no one else knew about. Things I barely allowed myself to acknowledge. But that day, discovery tugged at me with gentle insistence. I opened the drawer and took out the scarf. It slid between my fingers like water, impossibly light. When I draped it around my shoulders, my breath caught. It wasn't the fabric itself, it was the way it made me stand differently.
Softer.
Straighter.
Truer.
Before I realized what I was doing, I was standing in front of the mirror again. Not the bathroom mirror this time, but the tall mirror on the back of the door, the one I always kept angled slightly away, as if preventing it from seeing too much. I adjusted the scarf around my neck. My heart thudded. And my reflection smiled. Not a full smile, just the ghost of one. But enough. It felt like my reflection was finally acknowledging me, like it had been waiting for this precise moment, the moment I allowed myself to try. I touched the scarf lightly. "Does this look wrong?" I whispered. The reflection didn't answer, of course. Yet somehow, standing there, I felt that the answer was no. Not wrong. Not bad. Just different. Different in a way that felt like exhaling after years of holding my breath. I tried the hair clip next. My hands shook when I slid it carefully into my hair, pushing aside a stubborn lock. It didn't match my clothes. It didn't match anything about the person I was supposed to be. But it matched the person staring back at me. That was the unsettling part. The realization that the reflection seemed more confident in this moment than I did. It wasn't confused. It wasn't ashamed. It was almost relieved, as if it had been trapped beneath my face, waiting for the chance to surface. For the next week, these small moments of discovery became my secret ritual. Each time the house was empty, I would open the drawer with growing anticipation. I'd experiment with the scarf, the clip, the undershirt. I'd turn slowly in front of the mirror, studying how it changed my posture, my expression, the way my eyes seemed brighter when framed by softness. And the more I did this, the more I noticed something subtle. My reflection wasn't mimicking me.
It was leading me.
If I hesitated, it looked braver. If my hands trembled, its gaze steadied. If I looked away, it stayed focused. I started wondering if this was normal, if everyone felt like their reflection was a version of themselves they hadn't met yet. But the world outside the mirror wasn't any gentler. If anything, discovery made it more difficult. I'd catch myself using smaller gestures, speaking with a tone that felt more natural but less acceptable, walking with a softness that made the boys stare. Every shift toward authenticity made school feel sharper, like walking through a hive buzzing with suspicion. One day, someone deliberately bumped into me in the hallway. "Watch it," they muttered. But then quieter, deliberately quiet, they added, "Careful, Sissy." For a moment, the old confusion surged back, hot and dizzying. But underneath it, something else flickered. A thread of defiance, fragile but real. Something inside me whispered,
"You don't know me. Not all of me. Discovery is dangerous like that."
It can make you fearless and fearful at the same time. It can make you protective of truths you've only just uncovered. That night, I went back to the mirror with a determination I had never felt before. I put on the scarf, the clip, the undershirt. I stood tall, even with my heartbeat tremoring in my chest. "Is this who I am?" I asked the reflection. It tilted its head, perfectly in sync with mine, except I felt it tilt half a second before I moved, as though inviting me to follow. The answer wasn't spoken. It didn't need to be. I felt it settle into my bones, warm and terrifying. "You're beginning." Discovery wasn't the end of my confusion. It was the transformation of it. A reshaping.
A softening.
The slow, cautious unraveling of the tight knot I had carried for years. But beginnings always lead somewhere. And mine was about to lead into conflict, the part of the story where truth meets resistance, where the reflection becomes both guide and challenger, and where I would have to confront not just who I was becoming, but everything that stood in my way. Conflict doesn't always arrive with shouting or slammed doors. Sometimes it begins in silence, the kind that settles too heavily, like dust in a room that hasn't been lived in for years. It slowly fills the spaces inside you until every breath feels like an argument you haven't yet spoken aloud. My conflict began with a single, accidental glance. It happened one late afternoon when the house wasn't actually empty, though I thought it was. I had come home exhausted from school, my shoulders tight from spending the entire day pretending not to shrink under whispers and lingering stares. Every step felt heavier, each hallway echoing with a single word I couldn't seem to outrun. "Sissy, Sissy, Sissy." By then, the word didn't stab the same way it used to. It lingered instead, hovering on the edge of truth and insult, waiting for me to decide its meaning. So I went to the mirror the moment I got home. I needed the reflection, needed its steadiness, its quiet acceptance, its silent encouragement. I stood in front of it, placed the soft scarf around my shoulders with a familiarity that felt almost comforting, and reached for the hair clip. But the clip hadn't even settled in my hair before I heard it. A soft inhale. Not mine. I froze. The mirror froze with me. For a moment it felt like the whole room stopped breathing. I turned my head slowly, dread spreading through my chest like cold water. My sister stood in the doorway. She wasn't supposed to be home. She wasn't supposed to be there in that moment, in that doorway, looking at me dressed in a way I had never meant for anyone to see. Her eyes weren't mocking. They weren't disgusted. They were wide, surprised, yes, but more than that, they were searching, trying to understand what she was seeing. But fear doesn't wait for understanding. I ripped the clip from my hair, tugged the scarf off, nearly dropped it in my panic. My heartbeat thundered, so hard I felt dizzy. Words tangled in my throat, but none of them came out. I wasn't. It's not. None of it mattered. None of it sounded like the truth, but the truth wasn't something I could speak. My sister finally blinked, her voice soft. "Why are you crying?" Only then did I realize tears were slipping down my cheeks. I looked at the mirror, desperate for guidance, desperate for the calm reflection that had anchored me for weeks. But for the first time, the reflection looked frightened too. Not of me. For me. I ran. Out of the room, down the hall into the bathroom, slamming the door behind me. I sank onto the cold floor, pulling my knees to my chest. Conflict had arrived. And its name was exposure. It wasn't just that someone had seen me. It was that I had been seen, when I wasn't ready to exist. My thoughts spiraled in frantic loops. What if she tells? What if everyone finds out? What if I really am what they call me? What if I'm broken? What if I can't go back to pretending? I didn't know how long I stayed there. Maybe minutes. Maybe hours. Time bends strangely when you're unraveling. Eventually, I forced myself to stand. I washed my face, though my reflection still looked red-eyed and trembling. It didn't look like the brave figure I'd grown used to. It looked small, fragile. And for the first time, I saw something painful in the reflection's eyes. Disappointment. Not in me. In the fear gripping me. In the way I had shrunk. I whispered, voice cracking, I can't do this. I can't be this. The reflection's expression softened, as though begging me to understand something I wasn't yet ready to see. That night was the longest of my life. Dinner felt strange. My sister kept glancing at me with questions she didn't know how to ask. I barely spoke. My parents didn't notice anything, but that almost made it worse. The secret sat between us all like a ghost. By the time I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, my mind was exhausted. The scarf was hidden again. The clip was buried under other objects. The undershirt was shoved so deep into the drawer it might as well have been buried. I wanted to forget everything I discovered. But you can't unsee the truth once you've stared at it long enough. The next morning, I avoided the mirror entirely. And the reflection felt it. It felt like ignoring a friend. At school, things somehow got worse. Not louder, but sharper. People seemed to look at me differently, even though I knew they couldn't possibly know what had happened at home. But paranoia makes enemies out of shadows. Someone laughed behind me in the hallway. Someone else whispered something I couldn't catch. Every glance felt like a spotlight. By lunch, I couldn't breathe. I went to the bathroom, locked myself in a stall, and buried my face in my hands. I didn't cry this time. I just trembled with the force of trying to contain everything inside me. When I finally lifted my head, my eyes landed on the metal bathroom mirror, scratched, warped, reflecting me in harsh fluorescent light. And yet, even in that unforgiving reflection, I saw her. The girl behind my eyes. The softness I kept trying to hide. The truth I couldn't bury anymore. Conflict wasn't destroying me. It was cornering me, forcing me to confront the parts of myself I had been too afraid to claim. That night, I returned to the mirror at home. I didn't dress up. I didn't put anything on. I just stood there, facing myself honestly for the first time since everything had fallen apart. My reflection looked tired, bruised by fear, but still there, still waiting. I don't know what to do, I whispered. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. Then my reflection lifted its chin, so subtly I almost missed it. A gesture of resilience, of quiet bravery, a gesture asking me to try again. Conflict had broken something open inside me, something raw, vulnerable, and painfully real. But it also carved space for the next stage. Because transformation doesn't arrive when you feel ready. It arrives when hiding becomes impossible. Transformation is never sudden. It's not fireworks or a cinematic reveal. It is a slow, patient unraveling, a subtle weaving of what you hide with what you long to reveal, until the line between the two begins to blur. It is learning to be both fractured and whole at once. For me, transformation began in small, quiet rebellions. The scarf was no longer hidden under layers of doubt. The hair clip was no longer a secret treasure. Even the soft undershirt that had once felt like forbidden armor became a talisman of self-recognition. I wore them alone at first, sometimes in my room, sometimes on the empty streets walking home from school, and each time, the act of simply existing in them reshaped the way I moved, breathed, and looked at myself. It was more than clothing. It was an invitation to inhabit my own body differently, to negotiate its shape, its shadow, its presence in the world. The reflection in the mirror became my co-conspirator, my silent tutor, my anchor. Each time I lingered, it taught me new ways to carry myself. The tilt of my shoulders, the curve of my hands, the softening of my gaze. The reflection no longer mimicked. It led. and I began to trust it. School remained difficult. Conflict had not vanished. Whispers continued. Glances lingered a fraction too long. But something inside me had shifted. I noticed the way my feet could step lightly yet firmly. The way my voice could slide into softness without losing authority. The way a carefully chosen movement could convey a truth that words might fail to carry. Transformation was most evident in the moments when no one was watching. When the world was quiet and my reflection smiled knowingly, I could feel my identity crystallizing, not as a performance, but as a lived truth. I experimented with gestures, clothing, hairstyles, and even the way I laughed. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, I began to see harmony in duality, strength in softness, courage in vulnerability, clarity in ambiguity. One evening, I found myself standing in the bathroom mirror again, the same warped glass I had once avoided. The lighting was harsh, but I no longer flinched. My reflection met my gaze unflinchingly. There was no fear, no shame, only recognition, a gentle smile, almost imperceptible, but enough to steady me. I reached up and adjusted the scarf, feeling the familiar fabric slide against my skin. My hands moved confidently this time. My reflection matched me perfectly, not because it had to, but because I had finally become synchronized with it. For the first time, I realized that transformation was not about changing who I was, it was about discovering that the self I had feared was already there. The reflection had not been waiting for me to invent it, it had been waiting for me to acknowledge it. Each stitch of clothing, each soft gesture, each quiet breath was a ceremony of recognition. Even interactions with others began to shift. The boys at school didn't stop staring, and the whispers didn't entirely fade. But I no longer crumpled under them. I responded with a presence that was neither aggressive nor apologetic, simply deliberate. It was as though my reflection had taught me how to exist in the world without losing myself. And for the first time, the label Sissy, once wielded like a weapon, felt like nothing more than a word, powerless against the certainty I carried inside me. Transformation culminated not in a moment of triumph, but in a quiet, almost sacred realization. I could look in the mirror and meet my own eyes without flinching. I could see softness and strength simultaneously, and I could accept both. The reflection no longer demanded permission. It simply existed beside me, a faithful companion, a testament to the truth that had been within me all along. On a chilly evening, I stood by my window, the scarf loosely draped over my shoulders, the hair clip securing a stray lock of hair. I stared at my reflection in the glass, layered over the faint outlines of the world beyond. For the first time, I didn't feel fractured. I didn't feel divided. I felt aligned, whole, human, complex, tender, and unyielding all at once. And in that alignment, transformation ripened into harmony. The final stage where fear dissolves into understanding, shame into acceptance, and conflict into dialogue with oneself. It was not the end of growth. I knew that the world would continue to challenge me, that others might never fully comprehend, that whispers would sometimes sting. But I had found my own voice, quiet, resilient, and unwavering, reflected back at me every time I dared to look. In those quiet moments, I realized something essential. Transformation is not about erasing the past, nor silencing the doubts, nor rejecting the labels imposed by others. Transformation is about embracing them, negotiating with them, and, finally, reclaiming them as fragments of a larger, richer self. And in that reclamation, I discovered an unexpected peace. The mirror had stopped being a barrier. It had become a sanctuary, a witness, a guide. And I finally, irrevocably, had stopped running. Harmony is not the absence of struggle. It is the quiet understanding that struggle and selfhood can coexist without one destroying the other. It is the subtle rhythm of breathing with the world, rather than against it. And for me, it was a culmination of everything I had endured: confusion, discovery, conflict, and transformation, distilled into a steady, gentle certainty. Morning light spilled into my room, soft and forgiving. I moved through it with ease, draping the scarf around my shoulders as naturally as I had learned to breathe. The hair clip rested in my hair without ceremony, a simple adornment, not a secret. I caught my reflection in the mirror and smiled, a full, unguarded smile that reached my eyes. For the first time, I wasn't trying to impress, hide, or perform. I was simply being. Harmony felt most real in the ordinary moments. At breakfast, I spoke freely with my sister. She noticed the change immediately, but there was no shock in her expression this time. Just curiosity, tempered by acceptance. We didn't discuss the word Sissy again. It had lost its power over me. Labels were now just words, echoes of the past that no longer dictated the rhythm of my life. At school, the corridors were still noisy, the whispers still lingered, but I no longer flinched. I walked with a presence that was soft yet grounded, a quiet gravity that drew attention without demanding it. I learned to navigate the world as both myself and the reflection I had nurtured, letting each inform the other. I began to notice small shifts in how others treated me, respect, perhaps even admiration, not because I had changed them, but because I had changed myself. Harmony was also internal. I could look in any mirror and recognize my reflection without fear or hesitation. The reflection no longer led or guided me. It mirrored me as an equal. The soft fabrics, the small gestures, the carefully chosen touches of color, they were no longer shields against judgment, but extensions of my identity. They were a language I had learned to speak fluently, one that communicated strength, authenticity, and tenderness all at once. One afternoon, standing by the window with the scarf gently swaying in the breeze, I realized that harmony was not perfection. My reflection bore traces of vulnerability, the echoes of fear and uncertainty still faintly visible in the curves of my face, the tremor in my hands. But those traces were no longer weaknesses. They were reminders of resilience, markers of growth, and testaments to the journey I had survived. I understood then that harmony was not about erasing the past or denying the struggles. It was about embracing them fully, the shame, the fear, the labels, the quiet victories, and weaving them into a self that could stand intact, even under scrutiny. My reflection and I were no longer separate. We were collaborators, witnesses, allies. We had become one. Life didn't suddenly become easy. Whispers still existed. Confusion still sometimes lingered on hard days. But the difference was profound. I had a foundation, a steadfast sense of self that could bear scrutiny, criticism, and misjudgment. I had learned to see the reflection not as an adversary, not as a mirror of fear, but as an ally, a teacher, and a companion in the journey of becoming. Harmony settled into my bones. It was a quiet strength, an invisible rhythm, an enduring understanding that I could exist in my own skin fully and unapologetically. And in that understanding, I felt a freedom I had never known. Not loud, not flashy, but enduring and complete. Standing once more before the mirror, I let my eyes linger. The soft light caught the subtle curves of my face, the gentle fall of the scarf, the calm certainty in my stance. My reflection smiled back, not because it wanted me to, but because it could finally relax into being itself. The reflection of a self that had reclaimed its narrative, its identity, and its voice. I whispered softly, almost to myself, "We are here, and we are whole." The journey had begun with confusion, passed through discovery, conflict, and transformation, and now settled into harmony. And as I stepped away from the mirror, I carried that harmony into every corner of my life, not as a mask, not as a secret, but as the truth I had long feared to claim. I had learned, finally, to see myself as an ally, not an enemy, to recognize my reflection not as a judge, but as a companion, to embrace every fragment of identity I had once hidden. And in doing so, I discovered that the world, the noisy, chaotic, judgmental world, could no longer shake me. I had become whole. Harmony was not a destination. It was a companion, a rhythm, a breath. And as I moved through the quiet streets, the gentle sunlight, and the soft shadows of my room, I realized that I had finally learned to live within myself, fully, softly, and unafraid. The mirror no longer reflected fear. It reflected truth. And the truth was beautiful.